Meet Noah. The conference room hums with conversation as executives are throwing ideas around. Noah sits near the head of the table, gripping his pen. He has an idea, one that could transform how they approach wellness at the organization. Noah takes a deep breath and he speaks. I have an idea of how we could integrate a more proactive approach to wellness. Before he could finish, an executive interrupts. We don't need new ideas right now. What we need to figure out is how to make our wellness programs more efficient. The conversation pivots and his idea disappears. Noah leans back in his chair, nodding slightly as if he agrees, but he doesn't. The moment has gone, and he sits there with that same feeling that he's been feeling for years. Noah is a polite and collaborative leader, but in rooms like this, where confidence is currency, he feels invisible. As he walks down the hall, his mind spins. Why didn't you challenge them? Why do you always hold yourself back? That evening at home, he barely touches his dinner, and his wife notices. Tough day? She asks. He exhales. I feel like I keep getting overlooked. No one listens to my ideas. She studies him for a moment. Well, how do you make them listen? Noah hesitates, because the truth is, he's not sure. Today, I'll be speaking with Erdem Koch, international keynote speaker and communications coach, who helps leaders like Noah build unshakable confidence and communicate like the top 1%. With over 20 years of experience in journalism, PR, and corporate communications, Erdem helps high-profile executives transform from hesitant speakers to powerful communicators. And I'm eager to hear how Erdem would coach Noah on how to overcome imposter syndrome, to tap into more executive presence, and to learn how to advocate for himself with more confidence. My name is Jay Abbasi, and welcome to Unstuck. Real people, real stories, real solutions. While the details are changed to protect anonymity, what you just heard is based on a true story of challenges that come up in the real world. And we discuss how to navigate these environments with practical tips to help you get unstuck and build a more fulfilling, impactful, and balanced life and career. Erdem, I'm so glad that we're doing this. I've known you for years, and I'm excited to dive into your background as well as Noah's story. And there's so many unique things about you. One of the unique things that I'd like to ask you about, and I learned from you because you've shared this with me vulnerably in the past, that you suffer from lepidopterophobia. Tell us what that is and what that's like for you.
So most phobias are irrational. In fact, I think the definition of phobia is that it is often irrational. But, you know, most normal people in the world are scared of spiders or sharks or things that are actually dangerous and present danger. That, I guess, is the point of fear, right? Mine is a bit strange in the sense that lepidopterophobia is the fear of butterflies and moths. And how this happened is it's a childhood trauma that I have. So from the accent, you could probably tell I was born and raised in Australia. And one of the main features of Melbourne Zoo, the city that I was born and raised in, is this amazingly beautiful butterfly house. People from all around the world come to visit this butterfly house. And I was 5 when Mum took me there for the first time. And I was wearing a big red puffer jacket. And turns out butterflies are attracted to colors of sort of high UV value. And I was in this butterfly house, and all I remember is the butterflies swarming all over me and covering my face and literally all over me. And I couldn't see my mum for what felt like an eternity. It was probably like 3.5 seconds. I was about 5 at the time, right? So my memory of time and distance and what actually happened, I may or may not exaggerate this story every time I tell it. But I was really scared. I was absolutely frightened. And I walked out of this butterfly house and I said, I never want to do that again. And since that day, I have been very afraid and have had a phobia of butterflies and moths. And now living in Australia, you become accustomed to spiders and, strange reptiles and insects around your house and mice and that kind of stuff. And any of them, no problem. I can pick up a spider with my hands. That's okay.
Wow.
But a butterfly coming my way, man, I'm running so far the other distance that it's a little bit embarrassing and a little bit funny. But I put it on my LinkedIn profile so that it generates conversation like we've just done here, and
Yeah.
it's a story I enjoy telling.
Yeah, well, it's fascinating how these associations get created at such a young age. I mean, a spider, I could definitely react poorly to. And I don't know the story behind my fear I have a fear of giant squids. Like,
Giant
I've never even
squids,
had an
okay.
encounter with a giant squid, but the idea of a giant squid, just thinking about it, concerns me. I start to feel a little nervous. It's the big eyes, the big tentacles. They have beaks, by the way, that can bite through titanium. That's how strong their beaks are, a
Wow.
giant squid. So I think the equivalent for me of that would be if I'm ever in a water and I saw something that looked like a squid,
Right.
I'd freak out.
And you could avoid that by not going into the water where there are known to be giant squids, right? Butterflies are kind of everywhere. And the other thing with butterflies are, I think they're the most harmless insect on the planet, potentially one of the most harmless animals. I mean, you'd have to fact check me on this, right? But they actually cannot give you any harm. They can't sting you. They can't, I mean, the most they can do is just, fly into your face. Like that is the level of danger, danger that it actually possesses. So it's a terrible phobia, man. But it's, again, like it's not to take ourselves too seriously and just make fun of some of these things.
Well, yeah, and hey, you also have this on the other side of it, a mouse or a spider doesn't seem to bother you when it bothers
Right, no
most
problem.
other people, right? So
Exactly.
yeah, so it's just weird how it's so unique to every person, and so I'd like to dive into a little bit of your background because I know that you have a law degree and you also studied journalism, and obviously communication is a big part of both of them. But I'm curious, Erdem, when you realized for yourself that communication was a superpower of yours, that this was something that you really wanted to dive into and explore. When was there something that happened that made you realize that this was your area of expertise?
Yeah, so look, going back to my childhood, I was actually a very shy, reserved, quiet little boy, which a lot of people won't believe me now, right? Because I can sort of talk till the early hours of the morning if you let me. But I was very reserved, and mum was deeply worried about the fact that, well, I've got this shy little kid. He's not very confident. What's going to happen with him? How's he going to get through life? Like any mother or father would be worried about their children. She was worried in that sense. And so she signed me up to scout classes, right? And like I was terrible at tying knots and building tents and that kind of stuff. It wasn't for me, and I really despised. And she said, "All right, the next best thing is she put me in theater classes." And I was about 8, I think, at the time. And when I started drama classes, I realized how much I enjoyed being on the stage and being a performer, and using communication as a way to convey thoughts and feelings and emotions to live audiences. And since that day, I have realized that the times in my life that I get a real kick out of the moment, or a real, my heart is full today, my cup is full today, are those days when I can feel that immediate impact on somebody. And I think that's the reason why I got into broadcast journalism as well. When you're sort of on air and doing radio and television, you have an immediate impact on the audience. You know it. You might get a call into the radio station, or you'll know what's working or not for television. And the theater for me was the same. So I think it can all be traced back down to that moment. And even today, it's those one-on-one moments, or the one-to-many moments, that I say to myself, oh, that was really something. More than if I wrote an article and put it out into the universe, or got published in one of the most renowned magazines. That doesn't sit well with me here as what that one-to-one impact would. So I think from then on, it's just been something that I've been super passionate about, and super happy as well when I do.
So, Erdem, would you say that you were more naturally introverted?
I think so, in the sense that I got my energy from being alone and around fewer people, right?
Yeah.
And I know that because of the games that I used to play at home. And I never really wanted to go out and be on the streets with the kids and play with the kids. And I was never really good at sport. And I never really feel like I fit in to my age group and the people who, that was sort of at my school and whatnot. And so naturally I turned inwards. And when I turned inwards, I'd do actually similar to what we're doing now. I'd set up a camera and some lights, and I'd pretend that I was like on television or something when I was 10 years old. And that, I think, that gave me a lot of energy and a lot of things to look forward to, I guess, is in terms of being alone. So I've never actually thought about whether I'm still an introvert or am I more extroverted. Does it change over time? Can it change over time? But I think growing up, I definitely was. Yeah.
Yeah, and I asked that question because I can relate so much to it. When I was growing up, I never had the natural inclination to go and make friends and just start conversations with anybody. But when given the opportunity to perform, to be on a stage, to give a speech of some sort, it was so thrilling. It was something that I found was so even comfortable. Like I would look forward to it, whereas other people would be so hesitant to speak
Mm.
publicly. And I don't know. I'm just curious. Like I don't know if that's a way that someone who has that natural introverted inclination compensates for that sense of at times maybe feeling different. It's like, in other words, it's maybe it's my way of connecting, with others, and it's just the environment through which I do it, or in that kind of dynamic with people. It's just a more, I don't know, maybe a more comfortable way of doing it. I don't know the answer to
Yeah.
that. Yeah,
And I wonder how much culture plays into this, Jay, because you and I have similar upbringings, right? Where we're children to migrant parents in English
yeah,
speaking countries. You obviously in the US, me in Australia. And there was always that cultural clash of um, what culture I sort of lived and breathed. Outside of the house, I was forced to be an Australian, whatever that meant. I'd speak English, I'd conform to Australian values, again, whatever that meant. And then I'd come home and we would speak exclusively Turkish because my parents were super scared that my sister and I would lose the language and the culture. It was a very Turkish house
yeah.
in the food that we ate and the values that we portrayed. And so there was this constant clash of, well, I'm Turkish at home, I'm Australian outside. Where do I sort of fit in society and where do I fit in the world? And for a long time, I not hid my identity because I can't, right? Because of my name and the way I look and the way I sound. But I didn't. I tried to play it down as much as possible until a point in my career where I actually started playing it up a little bit more, and I was super proud of my heritage. And I think it's just one of those things that a lot of people who grow up to migrant parents go through, of that trying to find their identity in life. And I suspect, and I'm yet to see, but I suspect that the next generation will find it a little bit easier. But I think it plays a part, and I'm super interested that you had similar experiences because of that sort of cultural similarity that exists between the two of us.
I think you're onto something, which is the sense of wanting to fit in
Mm,
and feeling as though in a performance setting, it's easier to do that, or it's I don't know, it's a way where you can connect. Whereas when you go home, it feels like there's always this sense of there's two sides. There's the home. For me, it was the Middle Eastern culture, right? And my father's born and raised in Jerusalem, and he moved here when he was 17, 18. My mother was born in the U.S., but still had the culture, and so yeah, it's like, where do I fit in? And for some reason, I guess the stage is one where I felt like I did, and it sounds like in many ways you have as well. So
yeah.
we have these kind of natural tendencies, you and I, where we could feel a little bit more comfortable to be able to speak confidently or to speak in front of groups, authority figures. But of course, there are a lot of people out there that really struggle, and you have a lot of insights into what are the ways in which we work through that. But I'd like to first diagnose the problem. So, in case, like, let's say Noah, right? He was really struggling with that room full of executives and other people who are in those authority positions. Why do we fall into that pattern? Or I'm like, what is do you think at the core, if we were to define the problem that people have with communicating confidently, what's the problem?
A lot of it comes to our fear of perception, right? Of how we're going to be perceived by others, which then feeds into the story that we start to tell ourselves. And the story that we start to tell ourselves is, well, they're going to think I'm not as clever as them, I'm not as intelligent as them, that I may not belong at this table, that I don't deserve to be in the room that it happens. And when you start to get ahead of yourself in terms of how you think about what you're going to say, how you're going to say it, it starts to generate into this unfair story that you're telling yourself, which then starts to morph into a mindset, which then starts to morph into an identity. So a lot of the people that I've worked with actually come to me with a very similar issue like Noah, saying, I want to be more confident when I speak to a room full of execs. I want to be more confident when I walk into a room. I want to command attention of the room and command respect. And half the time the issue is the story that we're telling ourselves. And it's really funny because you can work through all these practicalities and these tips and how to sound confident and, how to use your voice and what body language you should be portraying, etc., etc. What I tell people is after they've learned all of those things is to effectively forget it and to get out of your own way and to
Yeah.
just go on that stage or walk into that room knowing that you know what you know and to just deliver to the best of your ability. It's kind of like a college student or a high school student preparing for an exam, right? You can't cram everything that you need to know if you're memorizing things until the last minute. You actually just need to step back and let your brain relax and let your central nervous system relax to the best of your ability before you go. It's kind of like that. So you need the tips and tricks, but then you also need to get out of your own way. Half the time our mind is going too fast and we are thinking that people are thinking certain things of us, which may or may not be true. And in my experience, most of the time, it's not. People are too worried thinking about themselves to think about others most of the time.
Yeah. And when you're caught in that pattern of what are they going to think of me? How are they perceiving me? You're thinking about you, right? That's what you're doing, right? You're caught in your own self-absorbed thoughts about how you're being perceived, the judgments others may have of you, and therefore you're placing your sense of worth into what you think they think of you. So Erdem, how does one work through that? I mean, if you were to, I hear you. I don't think you want to just give them the tactical things. There are probably a few tactical things you could give, because I know you. We'll get to that, but working through the mindset stuff. How does one do that? Like, what are the ways in which you would help somebody to be able to get out of that mindset of I'm so worried about what they think into I can just be present and feel like what I know, I trust that I know it and I can speak to it confidently.
Yeah. Look, a lot of this comes down to ensuring that you walk into that room super prepared, right? It's amazing the number of times that the confidence just sort of starts to build when you know your stuff, when you are prepared. The number of people that walk into these rooms or these conversations who just don't feel like they're prepared and can come back to something. And that is why preparation is important. When you feel like you're going off on a tangent, even if it's only in your own mind in terms of what you're thinking, i.e., person X is thinking ABC of me, you should have the comfort to know that you can come back to the presentation or come back to the idea. If it's a one-on-one conversation, have your arguments and whatnot in front of you so that you can always come back to something if your mind starts to wander. It's, I always say communication skills and confidence it's kind of like, playing a musical instrument. No one is born knowing how to play the violin. And when you first start to play the violin, you're actually pretty terrible at it. But over time, as you continue to practice these skills and practice the art of delivery in this context, you get better at it. Now, if you stop it and you come back to the violin, you're probably going to be just as bad as you were in those early days, right? It's one of those muscles that needs constant training. But if you are practicing, if you know you can come back to certain content, if you've done your practicing in front of a camera or in front of a mirror, and you know where your sentences are going and you're comfortable in your arguments, I have found that naturally builds up someone's confidence. And when that builds up that confidence, then it's a snowball effect. Then suddenly you get to a point where, well, I can actually talk about anything now that is obviously in my area of expertise within, the boundaries of what I believe are the appropriate things to say. So
Mhm.
it is practice, 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 and it is seeking feedback at every opportunity. And that is where I think, people like me come into the mix, people like you come into the mix to say, let me just help nudge you in that right direction to help with things like mindset, story you're telling yourself, the narrative that you've done around yourself in order to project the confidence that you're so desperately seeking.
I'm with you. I think there's the preparation that one can do and their points that they wish to make, and I think that's really valuable. What I also always encourage people to do is to rehearse the interaction within your own mind to familiarize yourself with the setting that you're about to be in. So, in other words, think of a high performing athlete. Before the athlete would get onto the field or onto the court, many of these athletes will visualize being on the court, being on the field.
Yeah.
They will see themselves responding to challenges. They will play it out and feel what it will be like so that when they do get to the real game, they are mentally prepared. It's not as though it's a surprise anymore. They don't have to fear, how am I going to react to this? Because the mind has already said, okay, I've been there, I've done it. So when it actually is happening, it's much more of a behavioral response than it is an emotional trigger.
And to continue that analogy for a minute, to focus on the task and not what the story is in your head. So, for example, divers, right, into swimming pools. When you are first starting to dive, and even other athletes sometimes are taken to these, really high diving boards, and you look down and you see the water all the way at the bottom, and you're so high up and you're so fearful of what's about to happen. Coaches say to you, stop thinking, just do. You know what you need to do. You need to jump into that water. That is your task. How you feel about the situation at this moment in time is irrelevant. You actually just need to focus on the task. And that is, to continue the athlete's analogy, that is what athletes do, right? They sit there. If you think of a sprinter, 100-meter sprinter, just before the starting gun goes off, they are focused entirely on what they need to do. And that is listen for the sound. And as soon as the sound clicks or the gun is shot, to react as quickly as possible so you get that head start. They're not thinking about, well, how do I feel about this situation? Am I nervous? Am I going to win? And they have trained themselves to what I said before, right? To get out of your own way and to just focus on the task and just do what you have practiced doing this entire time. That is really the key.
And if you think about that runner, if I'm running and I'm thinking about the other runners, where are they relative to where I am?
Right.
You lost it, right? You're completely out of it.
Yep.
It's staying really focused on the present moment and trusting that your body is doing what it's supposed to do in its performance. And I think that you see this as a quality in the top communicators. And I know that you suggest that your goal is to help people to be the top 1% of communicators. So you've worked with people like this and you've seen them. What are some of the qualities you see in them? I mean, obviously confidence is one, but what are some of the traits that you see? What are some of the common themes that you see in these top communicators?
So top communicators make you feel like you're taken on a journey, right? And that is often because they are so good at telling stories. If you think about someone you know in your life, whether it's a family member, whether it's a boss, whether it's a sibling, a romantic partner, and you know the times when you usually switch off and start thinking about other things while that person is still talking, the only reason you're doing that is because they're not captivating in how they're talking to you. They're not interesting. They haven't made things interesting for you. And so top communicators, if you look at people like the Tony Robbins of the world, the Gary Vaynerchuks of the world, the Mel Robbins of the world, the Brene Browns of the world, you sit there and you hang off every word they say because they are brilliant storytellers. They take you on a journey from point A to point B. And that is if there's one thing that I try to give to people who I work with around communication is I say, start with knowing where your audience is, start there, meet them where they're ready to be met, and then slowly take them over to where you want them to be, especially if you're trying to persuade them about a particular way of thinking. If you kind of think of the analogy of children, right? I have a daughter who's almost 5, and just when you think you've got parenthood figured out and, the tantrums are almost over and, life throws other things in your way. And now it's just everything's no. Everything's no. She doesn't want to do what we tell her to do. She wants to do what she wants to do, right? And in those moments, and of course, it always happens, and I'm sure parents can relate to this. It happens when you need to get out the door because if you're 5 minutes late, there's going to be traffic on the way to school, or gymnastics class is about to start, and she always picks those moments where I would prefer her to just listen to me and let's go. You've got 2 options. I can either yell and get angry, work myself up, and be like, for God's sake, just do as you're told. Which, of course, the kid doesn't look and go, oh, that's right. I should do as I should just do as I'm told. It has the reverse effect where they get even more riled up. Or I can just say, okay, where is she right now? What does she actually need? Does she need a hug? Does she need to use the bathroom? Does she need a glass of water? I mean, really look into where is she right now? And then how can I get her to where I want her to be, which is put your shoes on and let's just leave this house before I completely lose my mind, right? And that is, I think, the heart of communication. The best communicators, the top 1%, say, where is my audience now? And how do I take them? And how do I take them on the journey where you get to the end of a speech or a discussion where you've hung off every single word and you go, I've never thought about it that way. And well, here we are now.
I love this. I think the one thing I often hear from people in Erdem, you probably hear this too, which is, oh, my ideas aren't new ideas. I don't have original ideas. I think you and I may have talked about that years ago. I think, yeah, right. And what we discussed was it's about what you just said, but if you can present it in a fresh way, in a way that is appealing, in a way that really resonates with somebody, then they learn that lesson because they may have heard it 5 or 6 other times, but they heard it differently. The way you said it captivated them. So you mentioned storytelling, and we all love stories. I mean, that's why the movie industry is so huge and billions, trillions of dollars come from the movies. We are captivated by stories. How does one learn how to become a better storyteller? I think it starts with meeting them where they are, as you said, but then how do you take somebody on that journey? How can you be a captivating storyteller?
Yeah. So one of the things I always hear from people is, well, I don't really have stories to tell. I don't. And I say, no, you do. You just don't tell them properly. And I use the word properly deliberately here because there is absolutely a framework to telling stories, right? There's obviously the introduction, there's the scene setting. You want a couple of characters. You want to describe who those characters are. If possible, you want a little bit of conflict. You want a villain. You've got all these different frameworks of how to tell a good story. And the theory is there. But in practice, the best storytellers are the people who take you there, who take you to that site of whatever it is that they're talking about. When you were explaining your fear of giant squids, for example, I saw you in that water, man. I saw you there, little fearful Jay, scared that a giant squid's going to come out of nowhere. And it's about painting that picture of, and of course, staying in the relevant details, right? Like, my mum is a very good storyteller, but she gets lost in the details, and then suddenly I don't know where she is, right? I'm like, okay, it's really important that you turn the kettle on at that particular moment. Like, I don't think that's relevant to the story. But really painting the picture of, it was a warm day, and we're walking down this most beautiful beach. And if you just think about all the noises of the seagulls were coming in, and look, I've started taking you in your mind to this gorgeous beach, and then using my voice to also amplify the moments where I really want you to be concentrated. If I then say, and all of a sudden, using that sort of the power of the voice and working through that voice to tell those stories, to me, it's just saying, okay, if I am recreating that moment, that particular story that I want people to resonate with, how do I paint that picture? And how do I paint it in a way where they feel like they're there? And a lot of it is just expressing your emotions and explaining what happened in the relevant detail and going back to that moment and reacting in the way that you would. It's kind of like, let's stick with the child analogy for a second, right? We read to our children, and often it's around bedtime when they're tired and you're tired and you just want the kid to sleep. You could either read that book in very straightforward, without using different character voices and whatever, or you could get really into it and you could give a character a voice and you could underline or emphasize some of the words that should be emphasized and get that child really interested into reading this particular book and being captivated by this particular story. Take that and just work it into your day-to-days, and don't be afraid to use it either. I start off every presentation with a story, and I
Yeah.
always think, how do I tie it back to whatever we're talking about? Am I giving a talk on communication skills? Am I giving a talk on mindset, on leadership? Whatever training I'm giving in that moment, I always find a way to start off with a story, maybe even embellish it a little bit to make sure that it's resonating with the audience, because it completely gets people going, oh, okay, this is interesting, versus just starting and going, "Hi guys, my name's Erdem, and today we're going to talk." I mean, that's boring, right? No one cares about that guy. He's just not
Right,
interesting.
right, and you are not boring, my friend. Absolutely
Thank
not. I
you.
mean, I just know from our conversations, and I can just sense by the way in which you would approach these kind of talks with people that you just have a natural ability to captivate an audience. But I appreciate that you're breaking down the formula here, and what you said, by the way, remind me of the movie Mrs. Doubtfire. Have you ever seen that movie with Robin
Oh,
Williams,
one of
Mrs.
my
Doubtfire?
favorites, of course.
Okay, so there's a scene where they have a new babysitter, and his daughter says to him that she doesn't do the voices when she reads to
Yeah.
me at night.
Stuart Little,
And
right?
I
Stuart Little, the book.
right. She doesn't do the voices. So she's reading the
Yeah,
same book that Robin
yeah,
Williams was reading, but because of the way he did it, it was so much more memorable for her, and it was so much of a better experience than when the other
yeah.
babysitter was. But you started with something that I think is so important, which is you said you have to go there yourself.
Mm.
You have to feel what you felt. And what's fascinating is this is something I shared. I remember it was about 3 years ago now, maybe two, where I was working with someone, and this was something that was important to her. She wanted to be a better storyteller, a better communicator. And so the advice I gave her was what you just said. I said, you have to bring yourself to what you felt in that experience, what you saw. In other words, don't just tell the story like you're just remembering it word from word in your head. It's no, you remember what it was like when you were actually there. It just then comes out in your tonality. And what's fascinating about this, Erdem, is that the next week, my best friend in the world, he and I went on a hike, and he is an incredible communicator. And he went to a class in New York City, and the person was this public speaker, won all these different kind of awards for public speaking. And the first lesson he gave was when you tell a story to go back to what you felt when it happened. So it was really a nice reinforcement that what I was sharing is something this person also advocates for, and it seems like you do as well.
Yeah. No, that's exactly right. I mean, that is the starting point, right? Because I think what happens is people get obsessed with formulas and ways and think, oh, who's the villain and what happens here and where's the Christian? It's like, no, actually, just there's a reason why you're telling that story, because it
Yeah.
obviously affected you. Now go back to that moment. How it affected you. I want you to affect your audience in the same way, using your words, your tone, your body language, and you can absolutely do it because it affected you then. So I want it to affect you again.
I love that. It wouldn't be compelling to you if you didn't remember it, right? Like you
Right.
remember it because
Right.
it's compelling. You think it's
Yes.
a great story because it actually is. So it already has the pieces there. You don't have to overthink it. I love how you put it. So, Erdem, one thing I wanted to ask you about is in Noah's story, he deals with someone who interrupts him. So Noah is a little bit more of that kind of polite, reserved personality, and he wants to share an idea in the meeting. And as soon as he begins, somebody bulldozes and just interrupts, and he doesn't get a chance to finish his idea. How do you deal with bulldozers? How do you deal with people who have that inclination to interrupt and try to dominate the conversation?
Yeah. Look, I am a bulldozer, so I know what Noah's going through from the other side of the fence. My wife is forever telling me off that I interrupt. I'm actually a serial interrupter, and I need to. It's something I try to work on quite a bit. Um, so there's a couple of tips, real practical tips. I think we've done a lot of theory, so let's get into the practicalities. I would start by encouraging Noah to frame the conversation, and what I
Mm,
mean by that is set the boundaries of what you're going to say. For example, uh, I have this new idea for a mental health initiative, and it's really in three separate parts. One, I have just framed the conversation to say, hey, I'm going to go through three things. And if you jump in at number two, especially in a room full of people, people are going to know that I haven't got to my third one, right? Another way to do it is to say something like, look, I've got this idea for a mental health initiative in my workplace. This is going to take me about 3 to 4 minutes to explain. And then I'd love to hear what everyone thinks, right? So there's so many different ways that you can frame the conversation. And if you think about it, we actually do this in our day-to-day lives. I mean, if I need to have a serious conversation with uh, an employee or my boss or my mum or my wife, I usually say, look, I really need to talk to you about something. Now, when someone says that to you, it's very hard to interrupt. You feel really rude, right? Interrupting usually happens. People like me usually interrupt if I don't feel like the other person is giving value to what they're saying. If it's a simple explanation of their day or something they lived, and again, they're not that compelling, captivating storyteller, people like me, bulldozers, will feel the need to interrupt and say, "Well, I'm a bit better at this." It's very arrogant. I'm very well aware of that. It's a very arrogant way to think about things, but it happens, and it happens a lot in the workplace. So there's some immediate tips. The most extreme advice that I would give is to actually just to keep talking, because if you're talking
mm,
and someone interrupts and you just keep talking, boy, do they feel awkward. They feel super awkward. The interrupter. Because it's not going to turn into a shouting match. I hope not anyway in a workplace, right? So you just keep talking. It's not necessarily about being rude. It's just about saying, hey man, I've got the floor right now. Like, calm down. Then of course there are other little tips and tricks, right? Maybe it's better if Noah stands up. Maybe if he says, look, I've just prepared again, this is all framing. It's you are framing to
yeah.
take command of the room. Then, of course, there's other ways that we could approach it. Again, it depends on the other person and interrupter as well. I mean, this goes into workplace politics and etiquette a little bit, but I would encourage people like Noah, if this person is a serial interrupter, is to actually just have a conversation with them before the meeting and get them to buy into the idea before the meeting. So that you say, I actually want to run something past you. We're going to talk about it in the meeting tomorrow, but I've got this idea for and it's much harder for someone in that situation to just ignore you or to interrupt you or speak over you. Then you've suddenly got buy-in. I mean, you've worked in corporate world, Jay. You know that meetings are often a place of theater, right? People hold meetings. Decisions
Yeah.
are usually made before. And it's just like to say, yeah, we held a meeting. So if you can get some buy-in from that person and some other people as well, suddenly, again, it's going to help with your confidence when you come to
Yeah.
projecting the idea in the meeting. So, I mean, again, there's so many ways that you could take it. Depends on Noah, depends on the situation of the room, but they're sort of some of the top things that come to mind.
Yeah, and for everybody listening, I really want you to take home that message that Erdem is sending around framing. I think that's so valuable to be able to frame a conversation. It gets everybody bought in. It gets everybody on the same page. And to me, that's the mark of great leadership as well. Yes, it's great communication, but it's also great leadership to be able to
Yeah.
frame the conversation. And one of my favorite ways to work through this, and I share this with my clients all the time, is what I call permission to proceed. So permission
Mm,
to proceed is what you just said, and adding a short question at the very end when you were
yeah.
saying, there's something that I'd like to talk to you about, and then, is that okay?
Perfect.
I have an idea that I'd love
Perfect.
to share with the group today. Would it be all right if I share it? And when
Yep.
everybody says yes, the likelihood of interruption is down to close to zero at that point, because everyone has just agreed that they're going to listen to your idea.
No, that's exactly right. And what happens is you've not only framed it, you've, again, what we said before, right? You've got buy-in. They have agreed to letting you go through the 3 chapters of your story, the PowerPoint presentation, the next 30. They have agreed to it. It is far less likely that they're going to try to interrupt. Ultimately, here, you have to look at what can I do to change this situation, right? If that guy is a serial interrupter, it's probably not a Noah thing. It's probably a everyone thing. He probably does that with everybody. So then Noah and people like Noah have to think, okay, well, I can't change him. I can't control the situation. What can I do differently? Where is the power? What can I do differently to behave in a certain way or to adopt a certain way of being or doing, which will allow for a more favorable outcome, which then, of course, will then continue to boost his confidence as well.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely. Now, one thing you said a moment ago, Erdem, I have to challenge you on, is that
Please.
you said that you are arrogant at times, and I challenge that because I've never seen you as arrogant ever, ever. Like I really have never seen that. I mean that. Like I just always feel that you are genuine, you're authentic, and at the
Thank
same
you.
time, you will can assert your ideas. And what I think could happen to someone like Noah is that they say to themselves, "Well, I want to be a more sort of communicator, but I don't want to seem arrogant. I don't want
Mm.
people to think I'm arrogant, right?" So they hold themselves back. They use that as an excuse to not assert themselves. So, how do you recommend someone works through that to be able to have that ability to assert their ideas and be outspoken without feeling as though they are being arrogant?
Understanding that feeling that you're being arrogant, again, is putting the power in what somebody else thinks about you. Let's play it out, right? Noah develops this amazing skill where he can talk about anything that he wants, his ideas. He starts bringing these ideas to meetings. They are dismissed, they are listened to, they are adopted, and then people start to say, "Geez, that Noah's a little bit arrogant now, isn't he?" Okay, let's take that. Let's. What do you mean by that? Let's take it one step further. Why is he arrogant? Oh, he just comes into these meetings with, thinks that he owns the place, and he sits there and he gives his ideas, and okay, and then what happens? Oh, and then people listen to him, and hang on a second, is that arrogance, or has Noah suddenly found his voice? I mean, especially in the workplace, I think when we define things like arrogance, they can be extremely dangerous because what is arrogant to you is confidence to somebody else, right? What is being rude to somebody is assertive to somebody else. There's that whole debate, and rightfully so, I think, around when women are uh, assertive in a meeting, they're not assertive; they're outspoken. They speak a little bit too much. Whereas if a man was to do it, it would be assertive, right? That whole gender debate that exists in the corporate world where women are still, incredibly underrepresented around, Western societies. The same, I think, is applied to, well, if a quiet person starts to speak up, what, suddenly they've become arrogant? Suddenly they've become what, but you've always been confident, right? So I think there is to encourage Noah to put less value in what others think about him and to
Hmm.
put all the value and place the value, sorry, in what he thinks about himself. Are his ideas now suddenly getting up? Does he feel like he is heard? Does he feel like his voice matters? Amazing. Amazing. And if it doesn't, who cares? Maybe you're in the wrong place. That analogy that people always use. A bottle of water will be $2 at a supermarket, $3 at the gym, and $6 at the airport, right? It's the same bottle of water. Know your worth. You are going to be a different value in different organizations. And sometimes in the extremes, I would say, well, maybe you're just in the wrong environment, dude. Kind of like me when mum taking me to scouts. I mean, scout camp was the wrong environment for me. Put me on the stage, suddenly got a kid who's gone from shy, introvert, quiet, reserved to loud, confident, and wanting to show off to the entire world.
Yeah. Well, I think the thing that someone like Noah has in his favor is that he's already self-aware enough to be mindful of how he may or be perceived as arrogant. So
Mhm.
why I say that is because the people who are considering this before they even make a change are already self-aware, and so they're unlikely to be very arrogant. So in other words, if you're already considerate of other people, that's not going to go away just because you start speaking more
Right.
assertively. That's just something that's ingrained in you. And then the other question that always comes to my mind is, well, what's fueling this? If what's fueling your desire to be more assertive is so that you get recognition and you get promoted and you get all the nice things, then yeah, you might be at risk of arrogance. But if what's fueling the work that you're doing is so that you can make a greater impact on others and you can be more of service and that you can help the group to align towards a vision where they can improve operationally, whatever it is, then hey, it's never going to be received as arrogance because everyone's going to sense that you're coming from a good place.
Yeah. And to give off that sense at every opportunity, to get what we spoke about, the buy-in, take people on the journey with you. You know, you will come across as arrogant if you come in with ideas, very top down. Here's what we're going to do. Here's why I believe that's the most important to, versus getting the buy-in, having the permission to proceed, doing all those things that we spoke about, which just takes people on the journey. I mean, if you think of political figures, they do this all the time, right? They take people on a journey with them. From, if we take the US as an example, Obama's Yes We Can and Trump's Make America Great Again are actually not that different. Their policies are different and that the way they view the world are different, but they are both incredible communicators. And you
Yep.
would surely acknowledge that, regardless of which side of the political fence that you sit, because they had a way to resonate with their audience. And of course, all the swing voters in between that voted one way or the other across those multiple elections. But they resonated with their audience. They took them on a journey. And that is what, good communicators, the top 1% always do. And beyond just communicating, but just that general workplace culture, life culture, romantic relationships, friendships are always more powerful if you take people with you rather than leave people behind.
Yeah. And I've had the experience myself, Erdem, of falling into that pattern of wanting to be outspoken because I felt like I was supposed to, and I was trying to maybe beat my chest a little too much. I've been there, I've done that, and I realized afterwards like that was silly. I was once on a call. This was years ago. This was at Tesla, and I was feeling a little insecure about at the time because there were a lot of people being laid off and there were a lot of leaders on the call and everyone was sharing ideas. And I remember like I jumped in with an idea and I could tell right after I said it, it wasn't received well. And I realized later it was because I was fueled by, I just wanted to say something to hear my own voice. And it was received like that. And then there are other times, of course, where when I spoke from the heart, I just spoke genuinely about an idea. It was so much better received. So we have to always ask ourselves, what's fueling it? What's behind it?
Yeah.
What are you hoping to get out of it? And I don't know. We have this sense of being able to recognize someone's energy in how and what they're saying, and if it's genuine or if it's not. Now, one thing I want to ask you, Artem, I always ask people at the end of every one of our conversations is to imagine you had this interaction with Noah. So let's say Noah he listens to one of your posts, or he watches one of your videos, or he goes to your website, and then he connects with you one on one, and he tells you his story. He breaks down everything he's going through. You listen, you acknowledge what he's going through, and as someone who wants to coach him well, you may not go with just direct advice and start vomiting things at him. You may ask him a question to evoke a response, a question to help him to start to come up with a solution himself. What would be a question that you would ask Noah?
A good question in itself. I like to start with taking people to the end of what they define success to be. So in Noah's situation, if it's not being interrupted, if it's getting my ideas heard more, if it's getting a promotion, whatever it is, let's find that thing that you've identified as a problem. Let's fast forward to whenever, doesn't matter when that is. It might be 1 year, it might be 2 weeks, it might be 3 years. And try to get them to visualize that moment and say, what does that moment feel and look like to you? And then explain to Noah how he can get there working backwards. Because often what happens is people are so ingrained in their problem, they are so into the weeds of everything that they can't see what will happen whenever their own self-imposed finish line is. You know, I know one of the things that you do so well is you ask the simple question, so what? Well, then this will happen. Okay, so what? But then this will happen. So what? And you are forced to go deeper every single time. And, you know, if you think about all the issues and problems that we've all had in our lives, our success rate, if you were to put a percentage behind it, is 100% because we're here, right? We have 100% gotten through all the issues and problems in our life, no matter what and how hard the consequences are, we've gotten through them. 100% success rate. They are some pretty good odds if I was a betting man. I would put a lot of money behind that if you would tell me that there's a 100% guarantee of returns. And that's what I want Noah to feel. I want him to go to the finish line and say, well, there's a 100% chance that you're going to get there, man. You will get there. So tell me what it feels like in that moment. And now let's work our way back to today to say, okay, this is the journey that we need to go on together.
I love it. I love it. It's a mantra that I've, or I don't know if my axiom maybe would be a better word, that I've held on to for years, which is proceed knowing that success is inevitable.
Yeah.
And if you proceed knowing success is inevitable, it's a sure thing. And you will have a lot more confidence and you'll be able to work through it so much more effectively. So, Erdem, I want to thank you, my friend, for taking time out of your day to chat with me, to go through Noah's story. I would really recommend everybody check out Erdem on LinkedIn. I know you're posting regularly there. I had a question about the pilot announcements. I wanted to ask you about that. We didn't get to it, but that was a funny post that you had recently about how, pilots, how they sound when they're giving their announcements and how ridiculous that is.
Yeah.
Maybe we'll do it another time. Maybe in the next
No
conversation
problem.
we'll talk about it. But anyway, so there's great contact like that, as well as there's erdemkoch.com, which is ERDEMKOCH.com. And there's a lot of information about your coaching, your speaking, and your consulting. Check Erdem out. He's got a lot of great material there. Erdem, thank you again, my friend, for jumping on this call with me and sharing your insights.
Oh, thank you so much, Jay. The pleasure's been all mine.
I am so glad that you had a chance to meet Erdem. Erdem has such great energy about him. He's incredibly fun to chat with, and he offered so much wisdom in this conversation. I'm going to do my best to synthesize it down to our 3 insights and our 3 actionable takeaways. The first insight is that when we're struggling with communication, it's because of the story we're telling ourselves. It's the fear of perception. We're caught in self-absorbed thinking. And I think having this awareness is valuable, and it helps us to learn what we need to let go of. Second insight, the importance of being a captivating storyteller. He talked about how we want to start where they are and take them on a journey. Paint the picture for them. Use all senses, visual, hearing, what you feel. And to be able to tap into the power of your voice, the tonality as you're telling the story. And I added to it, and Erdem and I both chatted about this, which is go back to that moment of what it was like when you really experienced what happened in that story. The third insight, our success rate is 100%. I love that because he's right. You're listening right now to this podcast. Your success rate is 100%. You're here. You're doing great. Acknowledge that. Man, isn't that amazing? Your success rate is 100%. And it's true. It's based on evidence. You're here. Actionable takeaways. Number 1, be prepared. when you're about to do something important in regards to communication, that is an important conversation with executives, an interview, you're about to go on stage, public speaking, rehearse, rehearse, rehearse. Make it where you can say it without having to think about it. And that way you can just focus on the task at hand and not start thinking about the outcomes and what people think. Actionable takeaway number 2, frame the conversation. I love that. He was saying how there are 3 parts, part 1, part 2, part 3, a way to frame the conversation before you start speaking. That way you have less likelihood of interruption. And if someone does interrupt, I like that he said it, just keep talking. And the person will end up realizing, oh, I got to stop talking. I should shut up because this person's continued to go. And then I offer that other option of permission to proceed, where you ask a question to get buy-in before you begin sharing your idea. And third actionable takeaway, asking yourself, what does that moment feel and look like when you are communicating at a high level? What does that moment feel and look like? Get clear on what that really will be when you experience it, so that way you can work backwards to create that experience. Join us in our next episode on Friday. I'm going to dive deeper into storytelling, and I'm going to go through a model which I often share with the clients that I work with. It's called the SPEAR model of storytelling. So many people have heard of the STAR method, and I think the STAR method offers a lot of value. I've considered, how do we really help people to stand out with storytelling in a way that will be so memorable that your audience, the person of whom you're speaking with, will feel captivated by what you're sharing. And I think SPEAR does a better job of that. I like to think of SPEAR as like STAR on steroids. And that will be released on Friday in our shorter episode. Spotify, Apple, Amazon, all those podcast platforms will have it. Won't be on YouTube though. So until next time, thank you so much for listening.